become a really invasive species and be detrimental to our native wildlife. And so we're trying to trap them and get rid of them before they become a potentially big problem.
Well, that went courtesy of WJCL, ABC News 22 out of Savannah. And if you're in that area and you see one of these creatures, you're supposed to call the Georgia DNR. Monsters can show up in many forms. This one a threat to Georgia's natural wildlife. But I do doubt that what our caller saw was a tegu. But we do appreciate her reporting it, whatever it was. Now, if you have a true paranormal story you think would be perfect for Monsters Among Us, call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or visit the website at monstersamonguspodcast.com for more submission options. And don't forget, I'm still looking for religious calls from the cloth or the clergy. I'm thinking exorcisms or miracles or people brought back from the dead, stuff like that. I imagine we're going to get some pretty wild ones. Oh, and be sure to use the word clergy very early on in your call so I can search it out. Now, next up, we venture to the state of North Carolina, where Dez has an entry he'd like to share with us.
Hey, what's up, Derek? I'm Dez. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I had a call because I had something happen to me last year. I was at a beach called Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I was there with my girlfriend and my dog, and it was about 8:30 at night, like 9 maybe. Me and my girlfriend had just woken up from a nap from being at the beach all day, and I had opened a beer, and I was just kind of like enjoying the night, enjoying the breeze at night, just listening to the waves and the ocean, and I love that type of stuff. And I was looking because I seen some fireworks. I think there was a couple that was getting married on the beach or something, and we were just looking at that. But I happened to look up to the sky toward my left, and mind you, I'm on like the 11th floor of the hotel. So I'm looking up the left, and I just see a huge circular type of ship, I want to say it was a UFO. It had about 8 to 12 lights that were going around it, and they all were like little spotlights. And I thought I was going crazy. I was like, what is going on? Like, am I dreaming right now? And I called my girlfriend over, and I was like, hey, look at this. Like, what is that? And she said, oh, my God, so it's a UFO. It definitely is a UFO. And we were just staring at it in astonishment. Like, I've never seen a UFO, but I've always been a believer in the paranormal. I've never been like a skeptic, but I've seen multiple stuff that I couldn't explain. But that was by far one of the creepiest things I've seen, because, you know, it was my first time ever seeing an unidentified object that was just flying in the sky. And I know it wasn't any fireworks, because I just, you know what a firework looks like. This was standing in the sky, just floating. And after a while, I mean, the lights started going off one by one, and it was just gone, like it was never there. And I felt like I was going crazy, but I luckily had my girlfriend there to see everything and back up my accounts. But I appreciate you, Derek. I have more stories. I'm going to call in someday, and I just wanted to call in for the first time. I appreciate all your stories. They help me get through my day at work. And, yeah, keep it up. I appreciate you. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, Des. You know, I went on vacation in Myrtle Beach a decade or so ago. And we too stayed in one of those 11 or 12-story beachfront buildings. And staring out at the ocean at night, from the top floor of which we were on, it's certainly not hard to imagine seeing something otherworldly zip by in the distance. And maybe, just maybe, Des was lucky enough to see just that. Now, I do feel it incumbent upon me to mention that the behavior of those lights remind me of military flares, specifically them dimming out one light at a time. So I'd say it's at least possible that this circle quote-unquote craft was simply a ring of parachuted flares intended to light up the ocean for what I can only imagine to be training purposes. But as I've stated ad nauseum, I wasn't there, so this is only a guess. And it goes without saying, I hope whatever it was something more exciting than military flares. Thanks again, Des, for sharing that experience. Now, folks, the holidays are fast approaching, so maybe consider some sweet Monsters Among Us gear for that amongster in your circle. Visit monstersamonguspodcast.com/shop for the complete list of goodies. And remember, our merchandise is mostly hand-printed on mostly made-in-the-U.S. stock. So supporting us supports small business. And golly, do we appreciate that. Okay then, who's ready to get a little freaked out? Because I think Kelsey's entry out of Montana will probably do just that.
Hello, my name is Kelsey and I'm calling from Montana. I just finished listening to the Christmas episode and it made me think of a heartwarming kind of odd story I have from this year, actually. Last Christmas, it would have been, I was back home in the state where I'm from with my fiance, and at my parents' request, we were going through all of my old belongings that were in boxes in the basement and deciding what we would bring to our house in Montana and what could be donated. And I had asked him to help me keep an eye out for a little blue unicorn figurine. And I didn't tell him the story behind it. I just told him that's what I was looking for. And my husband is a police officer, so he's pretty good at attention to detail. And we went through everything together, and as we'd find stuff, I'd tell him stories. But we never found the little blue figurine. And fast forward, we've gotten married in June. We found out we're expecting a little one. And I really started to get upset about this little blue unicorn. And I told him about this woman who had watched me as a child. She was technically my babysitter, but she was more like a grandmother to me. And how when she had passed away, all of us kids, because she had taken in a couple of kids and watched a couple of us, so there was probably 5 or 6 of us who viewed her as a grandma or a mom. All of us got to pick one blue figurine because she had collected them. And that's what the blue unicorn was. And I really, really wanted it to put in our nursery if our baby was a girl. And as I'm telling him about this and how much I just want to find this figurine, but we've gone through everything, we were actually down in those boxes again because we were looking for my grandmother's old jewelry chest. And my husband pulled it out of the box. And I mean, this thing isn't even a foot tall. It only has 3 drawers. And he said, "This is what you're looking for, right? The one where we went through your grandma's old jewelry in it?" So he remembered what was in it, what jewelry we had given to my mom, what jewelry we had kept. And I was like, "Yeah, that's what I want." And as he hands it to me, one of the 3 drawers falls out. And in it is something wrapped in tissue paper. Now, we had emptied this in Wisconsin. There was no way we had missed a drawer with something that filled the entire drawer up. And he was like, "Oh, I wonder what this is." And as he's unwrapping it, it's the little blue unicorn figurine. So I just have this gut feeling that the woman who was like a grandma to me knew I wanted it, and she placed it somewhere she knew I couldn't miss so that our little girl could have it. little girl ends up being a little boy, so it's not in his nursery, but it does sit next to my bedstand every night. And it just is really heartwarming because it makes me feel like she's still watching out for me. So that was my feel-good, kind of spooky, not really spooky, but unexplainable story. Thanks for the show, and I hope you have a good day.
Hey, I 100% had a unicorn figurine when I was a kid. In fact, I had all sorts of weird knickknacks. The weirder, the better. I think my prized possession was a Coors beer placard with a werewolf on the front. My mom used to work at a carryout. But to anyone that's seen my office/library/studio, that information comes as no surprise. I like stuff. But one thing I don't have is an object delivered by a ghost, let alone by a ghost that I'm fond of. So you should consider yourself lucky, blessed, or maybe even both, Kelsey. Because if it was your former babysitter that delivered the treasured item, then I believe the sentiment is worth even more than the item. It's some incredible stuff. So thanks again for sharing. No, I certainly don't want to bog you down with announcements, so I'll do my best to cover this really quickly. A few weeks ago, I launched a brand new YouTube channel called Paraweekly. Every other Friday, I break down the latest in paranormal news, entertainment, and we cover the most up-to-date video and audio evidence. We even throw in a few listener-submitted videos from people like you as well. So please do me a solid. It's free and easy, and I actually think you're going to like it. So go to youtube.com and search for Paraweekly, or simply follow the link in tonight's show notes. Then watch and or like a couple of the videos. Maybe even leave a comment, and for sure, you should subscribe. Producing Paraweekly is a ton of work for Sarah and I, so I certainly want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to enjoy the fruits of our labor. So now then, we make our way south to the state of Alabama. Jonathan, go ahead with your call.
Hey, Derek. My name is Jonathan. I'm from Alabama. About 2 weeks ago, I was coming down Interstate 65 right outside our state capital, Montgomery. And as I'm coming down the interstate, I look to the left, and right over some restaurants and some buildings, I seen what looked like to be maybe a jet, like a smaller black jet. The craziest thing was this thing wasn't moving. It was dead still, and it was low. It looked to me like it was right above the buildings. I mean, it could have been a couple hundred feet, maybe 1,000 feet up in the air. And as I was going down the interstate, this thing, I was going north and it was coming south. It was facing the direction of the south, and I passed it. Like, you would think the jet would be going fast enough, like it would come past me. You know, you would be able to see that it was moving, but this thing was not moving whatsoever. And I tried to get a picture of it, but I couldn't get my phone out in time. But it freaked me out. I mean, this thing literally did not move. I have no idea what it was. It was probably 4:30 in the afternoon, partly cloudy. Nothing weird about the day. Just seen that thing and it just didn't move. It didn't have no lights on it. Nothing. Solid black and wasn't moving. Right there in the sky. If you have any ideas what it is, just let me know. I hope you can use this.
Thank you, sir. This one I think I can explain. There was most likely an optical illusion at work here. Now, I tried and failed to find a well-worded quote to share here, but basically the slowing of the approaching plane, juxtaposed with the motion and the speed of the vehicle, causes the plane to appear to hover. In reality, it's moving quite quickly, but the motion of the vehicle that the viewer is in cancels a lot of that out. Now, I've actually seen this myself, driving down the 10 freeway by the Ontario airport here in Southern California, and it's trippy for sure. Now, I posted an example in the show notes, but I'm certain at least what I saw was nothing more than a trick of the eye. Now, it is worth noting that there are a few jets out there that can take off and land vertically. The Harrier in the F-35B. So the fact that the craft was black could suggest that it was one of these two modern marvels. But I don't know, Jonathan. What do you think? And thanks again for sharing. Let's dive back into the action with something straight out of a classic campfire story. Andy from Nebraska, welcome to the program.
Hey Derek, my name's Andy, and I'm calling from Omaha, Nebraska. I have a spooky story to relate to you. This was actually told to me by my grandma many years ago, and the story actually takes place in Kansas, middle of nowhere Kansas. Her and my grandpa were on a road trip. You know, this was before GPS, and so all they were going by is their map, which was apparently outdated because they were horribly lost. They were on an empty stretch of highway. My grandma said they hadn't seen anything for the longest time, no houses, no gas stations, no reference points. And on top of that, they were starting to run very low on gas. Well, eventually they see a house, an old farmhouse off in the distance down a dirt road. So they pull down the dirt road or the driveway, hoping to ask these people for directions. This is before cell phones, obviously. My grandma gets out and she goes up to the porch and knocks on the door, and she said this place was just absolutely falling apart. It looked like there had been no updates in over 100 years. She said she was surprised the place was still standing, but the strangest thing was the door was open. It was just the screen door to the kitchen was closed, and she looked inside. The water in the sink was running. The food was piping hot, and the table was set. She said there was piping hot food. She could see the steam. The table was set as if these people were about to sit down and eat dinner, but the problem was nobody was home. She knocked. They hollered in, "Hello, anybody home? We need help." And they stood there for 10 minutes completely dumbfounded. Nobody ever answered the door, and they had no choice but to leave. A little further up the highway, for the first time in a long time, they saw a truck coming towards them. It was an old-fashioned blue pickup truck, and inside was an old rancher or farmer. She said he looked very old, weathered, wrinkled. They stopped and they asked him for directions. He, essentially said, "Oh yeah, keep going down. You'll eventually connect with the other stretch of highway that'll take you home." The two cars pulled off in opposite directions. One going one way, one going the other. My grandma told my grandpa, who was driving, she said, "Wait, turn around real quick. We need to ask him how far down the highway it is because we're about to run out of gas." So literally 5 or 10 seconds later, my grandpa whips a U-turn right there in the middle of the empty highway to try to flag down the truck. And in that 5 or 10 seconds, my grandma swears on her life, she said that truck vanished. It was nowhere to be found. She said it was completely flat terrain. It was broad daylight. She said in the surroundings there were no bushes, no trees, no ditches where that truck could have gone and disappeared so quickly. It just was there, and then in the blink of an eye it was gone. And she was left wondering if maybe the old truck and the rancher were obviously a ghost or a phantom, and maybe the farmhouse itself wasn't real either. Maybe that was a remnant from a time long ago. So anyway, I hope you can use that on the show. Thanks so much for all the work you put into this, and have a great night.
Thank you, Andy. I looked for a good 10 minutes, but all my scary stories to tell in the dark books are missing. But I swear one of the stories, about an elderly couple that takes weary travelers in from a dangerous fog, sounds eerily familiar. Now later in the story, our protagonists begin to realize that the couple and the cottage they lived in had been long, long gone. So if you've read that series of books, you've probably stumbled upon that story. Otherwise I can only guess that the house's occupants hid from the stranger. Maybe they weren't supposed to be there and bolted at the first sign of another intruder. But were these people there long enough to create an entire meal? It's certainly weird stuff for sure. And we thank you again, Andy, for taking the time to share it. Now next stop, Minnesota. James will be there waiting for us.
Yes, hello. My name is James from Minnesota. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, and I really, really like it. So I decided to call in and share my story that I have. A long time ago, I was in the Navy military police, and we would patrol certain buildings and do certain checks on older, dilapidated buildings. Well, there was an old infirmary way back in kind of like the swamp area where everything was run down. Nobody goes back there anymore except for kids to kind of mess around with the old buildings and, kids to go and have sex and stuff. Well, this one evening, we were going through the building because we have to do checks on it. And there's always one room that's almost clean every single time. The rest of them are just torn down and everything. But the bed was made, the walls are all dusted, and there's a dresser with a picture frame on top of it. And the picture has a wife and a husband. Thinking nothing of it on my first day, we're just going through doing the checks, and everything was fine. Well, about 2 weeks later, there was some vandalism in the area and scraped up the drywall, tossed the covers around, and the light was left on, which was really weird because the light is never left on. So on our nightly check, like 2 in the morning, we go in to do our checks and walk through the building, and we look at the room, and the room's a mess. And everything's all scraped up and stuff like that, but the picture frame is still on the dresser. Honestly, I could draw it for you of how crystal clear I remember that the picture frame was still there. So we turn off the light and continue our check down the hall, and as we get about 10, 15 feet away from the room going down the hall, the picture frame slides out of the door and smashes against the wall on the hallway and breaks and falls to the ground. So me and my partner go back and look at the room. Nothing else has changed, just the picture frame. No one is in there. We made sure that no one's in the area. It's 2 in the morning, so we were both very freaked out and just got the hell out of there as fast as we possibly could. All right. Thank you for letting me share my story. Bye.
Thanks, James. I sort of have the same suggestion for you that I have for Andy. It sounds like a squatter of some sort. The clean room is the dead giveaway. But squatter aside, what's the deal with the flying picture frame? And probably more importantly, who or what destroyed the room? Now, regardless of any of those answers, I certainly do not envy you, James. My imagination cascades with potential monsters hidden in those shadows. So thank you for sharing the entry. Now, folks, if I can real quick remind you that if you love the show and want to support it, please consider joining Monsters Among Us Beyond over at Patreon. $4 gets you instant access to 53 full episodes and tons more bonus material. That's patreon.com/Monsters Among Us podcast. And now, with that out of the way, please allow me to introduce you to our final submitter of the evening. Here to round this thing out is Wyatt from the beautiful state of Oregon.
Hey, Derek, this is Wyatt in Oregon. I was just wanting to tell you about a pretty spooky experience that I had probably around the age of 10 to 13. I had really bad asthma during that time, and I started to see this all-white being, and it would come just before I would have like a major asthma attack, to the point where I would almost die. I would mostly see it at night. The very first time I saw it was probably 8:30 at night. I was taking the trash out to the garbage can, and I had to go out through the garage. And I looked over, and I saw this full body white, looked like an apparition type of thing. There were no eyes, but you could see that there was supposed to be eyes there. it had my kind of a silhouette of a face, and let's just say it was just terrifying. So I ended up going back inside and telling my parents about it. They rushed out and searched for it, and nothing was there. So later on, a few weeks later, I started kind of having an asthma attack. And I look out the window and I see this flash of light. It's not just like a normal light. It was a light of a human being. And it stopped and stared at me for a second. And I'm like, there's the guy. There's the white guy again. And he ended up staring at me for a second and then off like a flash of lightning, and terrified the hell out of me. And my parents didn't really believe me, but the next time, and I ended up having a huge major asthma attack. The next time I saw it, I just kind of shucked it off. This time it was in the middle of the day, but probably around like 6:30 or so. And I ended up having to get my inhaler because I had another major asthma attack. Then the next time I saw it, my mom had ordered me to go get some toilet paper out of this big barn that was in the back of our property. And it's a very nice sized barn with lots of stuff. And I was absolutely terrified at that barn. And I didn't want to go through the front door. So I ended up going through the back door, and I ended up touching the door handle. And while I was touching the door handle was moving from the other side, like somebody was jiggling on the door handle from the other side. It freaked me out, so I backed up. The door swung wide open, and there is this white, like pure all-white entity staring straight at me with white eyes, like where there should have been sockets, there weren't. And then with that entity's fingers, it decided that it needed to put its fingers in where its eye sockets would be and start tearing away from itself. And then all I could see was dark black eyes, like pure dark eyes. And let's just say I ran like hell back to the house, which was probably about a good 50 yards or so. And man, that is the fastest I've ever ran. Sadly, that was not the end of that particular individual. It would follow me on different vacations that we had. One of them was over to Puerto Rico. And again, I almost died because I had a major asthma attack. And we finally moved about a year and a half later or so, and that thing was still following me. And me and my parents are religious people, and we pray a lot. And so my mom was suggesting to ask God what to do about this entity. So I did, and I felt like the Lord wanted me to pray in spiritual tongues as loud as I could around our property 7 times, and that would be the end of that particular entity coming to visit me. And I did that, and I have never seen that entity since, and the asthma has stopped. So yeah, it was really weird. Just thought I'd give you a call. Love the podcast, and I listen to it every day. I'm going through it chronologically. So thank you. Keep up the good work. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, Wyatt. Well, let's start with a condition known as asthma. Now, essentially, the body attacks the airways to the lungs, causing them to swell, fill with mucus, and contract, cutting off the air supply. Now, in some cases, this condition can be deadly. And of course, I'm not a doctor, but I couldn't find much information linking asthma to hallucinations, which was my first stop on my logical approach. Not to mention that it also sounds like these beings appear to Wyatt before an attack, not during. So then I thought maybe there was some ghostly connection to the condition, but again, I came up dry. I was able to find several examples of near-death experiences that described similar lights and beings. But again, it didn't sound like Wyatt's life was in jeopardy during the sighting. So after following up on a few other loose ends, I realized this is not something commonly known. So here is where I fall back on the greatest research resource of them all. You, dear listener. If this story sounds familiar to you or you have suggestions for Wyatt, you know what to do. I wish I could be of more help, but this is a new one on me. But truth be told, I kinda love it when that happens. So thanks again, Wyatt, for taking the time to call in. And that's gonna do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Addie Lloyd. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And keep the party rolling by following us on social media. We have accounts at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And while you're at it, please leave a rate and review if your podcatcher allows. And lastly, that terrifying score you heard this evening, well, it's Code.ag Music and Carl Casey at White Bad Audio. Thank you so much for listening. Again, have a happy Thanksgiving. Until next week. Now, I certainly hope you have a little of that childhood wonder left in you, because you're going to need it for John's call out of the state of Oklahoma.
Hi, Derek. My name's John, and I'm calling you from Oklahoma. This happened to me probably about 15 years ago. My wife and I were leaving Walmart one night after grocery shopping, and we ran into an old high school friend of mine. And as we stood in the lobby area, just chatting and catching up, I had noticed an older Micronesian man and what seemed to be his grandson. He seemed to be probably around the age of 6 to 8, somewhere around in there. Anyhow, as I was observing the old man, the little boy, another woman had walked in to the entryway that knew my friend, and as they were talking amongst themselves, my wife and I began to watch the little boy as he busied himself by checking the coin returns and all of the vending machines and messing with the claw machine, trying to, perhaps jar a prize loose or something like that. And as he was doing this, he absent-mindedly let loose of a balloon that he had been carrying around, a little helium-filled balloon. And as it approached the very high ceiling of the entryway there at Walmart, the little boy ran over to his presumed grandfather and tapped him on the shoulder, and he points up to the balloon that is now quickly approaching the ceiling. And the old man just nonchalantly raises his arm and gives the balloon a come here motion with his finger. And at that moment, I really just burst into laughter because, well, you know, I mean, that's pretty funny. But my laughter, it stopped when I saw that the balloon reversed direction and became as if it was attracted to the old man. It started floating back down to the old man. So he grabs the balloon and he hands it back to his grandson. And just a few seconds later, the little boy let it go again. And as he tapped his grandfather on the arm to tell him about it, the old man does it again, only this time the balloon wasn't so far away from him. It was really just kind of perpendicular to him, and it floated sideways to the old man. At which point he kind of scolded the little boy, told him basically not to do it again. And that was that. I looked at my wife. We couldn't believe it. We both asked each other if we had seen it, and we both confirmed that we had seen it. So I'm not sure what it was. I know that there are a lot of stories about mystics of Micronesia and witch doctors, and a lot of stories that I've heard from some Micronesians that had lived in my hometown. I don't know. I'm a skeptic. I don't really know if it had anything to do with witchcraft, or maybe the old man just had like fishing line tied to his finger and to the balloon, but that just seems unlikely. Anyway, I wanted to call and give you the story, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Keep up the good work, man. I love your show. Thanks.
I love it, John. Thank you. Just when I feel like all the magic is gone from the world, John drops this gem. And as John said, this could have been a trick, but it seems pretty elaborate considering that they didn't even know they had an audience. But for this call, I choose to think more on the paranormal side. There just might be a little magic left. Thank you, John, for the awesome story. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a good night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes. It is freezing outside. In fact, we actually got snow on Monday. Not a lot, but enough to tick me off. It's late May. We recently bought a bunch of snapdragons and lemongrass and all kinds of stuff to plant in the yard, and it's frosted the last 2-3 nights. Awesome. Hopefully it's warm in your neck of the woods, or at least going to be warm. But if it's not, you're in luck, because tonight's show is on fire. I have a huge assortment of different paranormal stories to share with you guys this evening. So without further hesitation, let's launch in to our first call of the evening. And this first call comes with a bit of an apology from me. You see, I've fallen quite behind on keeping up with the incoming calls. As I'm recording this, it is 8:42 in the morning on Thursday, and I've already received 3 calls for the day. So as you can tell, it's getting difficult to keep up with these calls. So with that issue out in the air, I was doing some administrative cleanup the last couple days, and I found a few calls from several months ago, in fact, over a year ago, and I'm quite embarrassed that these calls remain hidden in the back of my emails. So tonight, I'm pulling mostly from those calls, and the first call of the evening is a bit special. So without further hesitation, the following is Mowgli's call from the state of California.
Hello, I am Mowgli from Concord, California. I have a story about when I was 4 years old. I was in my mom's bed. I woke up and I saw these tiny shadow figures, and they were walking all over the place, and they went into the window. And keep up the good work, and see you next episode.
Thank you, Mowgli, and I'm sorry that it's taken so long to get your call on the air. You might consider yourself a little bit lucky. Most people have to wait a majority of their life to see some sort of shadow-like entity. But fortunately for you, you got a jump start on things. Keep your eyes open, Mowgli, and let me know if you see anything else. And thank you again for submitting the call. Now, staying with the ghostly theme, our next call comes to us from Amanda in the state of Michigan.
Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'm calling from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I have a story that was relayed to me from a friend. This was when we were in our mid-20s, so about 10, 15 years ago. This friend of mine, let me give you a little backstory. She is a full-blown atheist, doesn't believe in the afterlife, doesn't believe any of that kind of stuff. She was living with her boyfriend at the time in their house in the downtown area of Grand Rapids, and that house used to be his grandparents'. His grandmother had passed away years before, and she always felt some strange presence in the house, even though she was not a believer. One day, she called me in the middle of the night and said, "I'm coming over, I'm on my way." She sounded really frantic and absolutely terrified. I didn't understand what was going on. She's like, "I can't talk, I'm driving as fast as I can." She showed up to my house and she told me the following story. She was walking down into the basement where the laundry facilities were in the house, and she noticed that sometimes the doors would be open and they had kind of like a halfway kitchen down there. It's a Michigan basement, it wasn't finished. It had just concrete everywhere, but there was a tiny little kitchen that looked like it was from the 70s. And there was a sink and, cabinets and everything that were all wide open. And she ended up kind of getting a little freaked out by that, but no big deal. She did her laundry, and she wasn't sure if her husband or her boyfriend had left it open or whatever. She just wasn't a believer. So when it was time to change out the laundry, she opened up that basement door. The basement was dark, and midway up the wooden stairs that were probably about 15 stairs coming up into the main floor, there was a green, and I wouldn't call it an orb, it was very stretched out. She said it was almost similar to an oval, but a very stretched out oval shape, green, coming up the stairs at her. She said she froze. She wasn't sure what to do. The first thing she did was slam that basement door, grab her keys, come to my house. When she gets there, she crawls into bed with me, absolutely terrified, going, "I don't think I can ever go back to that house because my boyfriend's grandmother is down there and she's haunting the place." And I couldn't believe what I was hearing from her. She definitely wasn't the type to believe in anything like that. Needless to say, she wouldn't stay there without him there. She never experienced anything when he was there, but when she was alone, she would experience weird noises. And this isn't the only person that it happened to. Years later, they moved out, and they rented a house to some friends of theirs, and they were experiencing the same thing. So I love the podcast. So I have another personal story of my own I'll be sharing soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Amanda. This call sort of hit a nerve with me, and I'll tell you why. I put myself in the grandson's shoes. If either of my grandmothers decided to come back and haunt me, I feel like I would be elated and not terrified. But that said, if my significant other's grandmother, a person that I'd never met, came back, I don't think I would share that same sentiment. There's something about the fact that you didn't know them when they were living, so you certainly don't know them while they're dead. That just kind of rings true to this story. So it's sort of a spin on the one man's trash is another man's treasure, or one person's grandma is another person's ghost. Thank you again, Amanda, for taking the time to share that call. Now, anyone that's listened to the show for any length of time can tell you that we've had our fair share of doppelganger calls. Typically, these doppelganger calls seem to be fairly cut and dry, but sometimes you get one that's just so weird. The following story comes to us from the state of Colorado and was submitted by Paige.
Hi, this is Paige again from Denver, Colorado, and I just have another story as I was having a fun hangout with my friends, and I have a really good friend of mine that has this classic story that I've heard dozens of times on multiple occasions, and I just love this story so much because it's so creepy. I finally got her permission to tell the story. So she works at a nightclub in Denver, downtown Denver. It's a pretty old building. A lot of those buildings downtown are very old, so they've been around a long time, probably early 1900s. This club in particular is pretty notorious for having some paranormal activity. A lot of the employees there have stories, or they know someone who has a story. They've had encounters themselves. You hear stories like this all the time from her and all her coworkers. She has multiple stories about this, but one that just always sticks out in my mind because it's so creepy is she was showing up to work one night, probably about 8 o'clock or so. This club has multiple stories or levels, so there's probably like 4 levels, and she works at the very top, so the top being the rooftop. She works all up there all the time. So obviously to get up there you can either take the elevator, but they also have flights of stairs. So she's going up the stairs, and her coworker, we'll just call him Dave for the sake of privacy, was walking down the stairs right by her. So they were passing each other, and she just said, "Oh, hey, what's up, man?" And he said, "Hi." And then she just kept going. So she then went around the second flight of stairs, just rounded the corner, went up the second flight of stairs. And believe it or not, coming down the stairs was Dave. But this time he had a red hat on. He didn't have one on before, but he had one on now. And obviously having a red hat is pretty noticeable. You notice stuff like that. So she noticed it. And she was so freaked out that she just kind of like, she stopped. She was like, wait, what? You know, she didn't really know what was going on. She was very confused, but just kind of let it go, if you will. Didn't quite let it go, kind of worked her shift, but had this pit in her stomach the entire night because she knew what she had just experienced was not normal, and she didn't have an explanation for it. So she continued to work. The club lets out or whatever, and they're all closing down, and Dave approaches her bar to say hi and just says, "Hey, how was your night? What's going on?" And she just kind of looked at him and said, "I think I need to tell you what happened to me. I wasn't sure if I was going to tell you, but it's so upsetting to me that I have to tell somebody, and I need to tell you." So she told him what happened. And she said that without even hesitating or skipping a beat, like he didn't even question what she said. He said, "So this one time, same situation, I was getting to work. It was about 8 o'clock or so, And one of the employee restrooms that's upstairs is just kind of like a one-person restroom. So you have to wait your turn. There's no stalls or anything. So he went in to go to the bathroom, and there was another coworker friend of his, we'll call him Jack. He was in the bathroom, and he said, "Oh, sorry, man, didn't see you there." So he stepped out, closed the door. He turns around, and around the corner is Jack. This person who he just had seen in the bathroom came around the corner and said, "Hey, man, what's up? How's it going?" And he was so freaked out, he ran back into the bathroom, and there was nobody there. So we have no idea what that means or anything like that. All I know is that that is one of a dozen plus stories of this club in particular, but a lot of the clubs on that street, or bars, if you will, that are kind of owned by the same company, they all have stories. Everyone that works there has a story. It's so creepy. I don't know what that means, but I had to share it because I just think it's so great and so creepy. So yeah, not sure what that means, but I just wanted to tell it. Love the podcast. I'm really enjoying it, and have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you, Paige. This one is obviously intriguing because of the double doppelganger situation. It almost makes me wonder if there's some sort of affiliation with the land, or perhaps the building. Now, this may be tinfoil hat territory, but is it possible that there's some sort of alternate dimension with a version of ourselves that's just slightly different? Maybe this time I'm wearing a red hat instead of a brown one. And furthermore, in this location in Colorado, the veil is simply thinner. Or perhaps there's a gateway there. I realize this is wild speculation, but when it comes to double doppelgangers, what else do we have? So thank you again, Paige, for taking the time to share that cool story. Well, if you're a fan of UFOs and aliens, this next call is going to be right up your alley. But before we launch into that, just a little reminder that I will be part of a panel at this year's Alien Con in Los Angeles, California. Now, the event spans from June 21st to June 23rd, but the particular panel that I'm part of, UFOs and Podcasting, begins at 10:20 a.m. on Friday in room 406. Now, if you're interested in UFOs, this is certainly something you guys don't want to miss. Check out this lineup. We have David Flora from Blurry Photos Podcast, Brent Hand from Hysteria 51, Ben Bolin from Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, Dr. Chris Cogswell from the Mad Scientist Podcast, John Goforth from Hysteria 51, and Ryan Sprague from Somewhere in the Skies. Now, just when you thought that wasn't going to get any better, it does. Because that evening, on June 21st at 7 p.m., myself, along with all the other podcast hosts mentioned, will be holding a mega meetup at Scum and Villainy Cantina at 6377 Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles. Now, I imagine this event will go late into the night, so come by, have a beer, and let's talk spooky stuff. Again, that's Scum and Villainy Cantina, Friday, June 21st at 7 p.m. And the panel is at 10:20 a.m. on June 21st. So, as for that UFO call, the following comes to us from an anonymous source in the state of North Carolina.
What's up, Derek? Calling from Denver, Colorado right now. I don't want to leave my name, but I just want to tell you your story. I think it's worthy for the show. I enjoy the show. Before I moved to Denver, I lived in Hofftown, North Carolina, small town outside Salem, North Carolina. One night, 2012, had to be like May or April because the Lakers and the Nuggets were playing. My son was just born. I just had a son. And I told my wife I would watch them at night, so I stayed up late, watched the game, put my son to bed, and I stepped outside I keep forgetting what I was doing. I don't know if I went outside to get something out of the car or something, but just late to get outside. But behind the house was a row of pine trees. On the other side of the pine trees was a cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac, usually, you'll see cars come and just turn around in a cul-de-sac. So I went outside, saw some headlights hitting the cul-de-sac. And I'm thinking, oh, it's just a car coming through the cul-de-sac. A few seconds go by, and I'm like, whoa, a car hasn't came through. I saw the headlights hit the tree, hasn't been a car cone, but I can still see the light. And slowly but surely, here comes an object just above the tree line, and it's in the shape of a diamond. It has two headlights. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this that's listening to it, but it has two headlights like a vehicle, like a car. But on each point of the diamond at the bottom was a light, but it wasn't very bright. The light wasn't very bright at all. Right over the tree line, I could see it real good. Very, 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 very quiet, very silent. If you didn't look up, you wouldn't have saw this thing. Flew over the tree and stood there, mesmerized at this thing, and it went up my driveway. The driveway was lined with trees, so it was kind of blocked. My view was kind of blocked, but I ran up the driveway to kind of see this thing. Flew over my head, flew over the pine trees that I thought it was a car that it was coming over. It was one tree that it flew over. Till this day, it lights up like fireflies are on it. And I live in Colorado now, but when I go back and visit my family in North Carolina, I make it my mission to go to this location and see if this tree is still lighting up. And as of 2018, this tree still lights up. And, I asked my wife if she sees it, and she's like, yeah, so just to make sure I'm not tripping, but I haven't told many people this story, but one of my buddies actually in the same neighborhood saw this same object. But, it's just crazy to me that this tree lights up. It's animals that live in this backyard. It's like a country area. Oh, where this tree is on the location, it's horses on it. And ever since then, it seems like, after that, it seems like the horses were attracted to this tree. I think it was a UFO because, it was weird, and the tree still lights up. Very quiet. Very quiet. That's my story right there out of Pottstown, North Carolina. If anybody's familiar with Pottstown, just go find you a spot in the country and look in the sky. I'm telling you, you'll see something. That's it, man. Thanks for the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you, caller. Now, the description of the actual UFO in this call reminds me a bit of the top-secret experimental blimp projects that the United States government supposedly was working on in the 90s and early 2000s. Perhaps our callers simply witnessed a test flight of this vehicle. Now, I'll be honest, I was a bit confused about the trees that seemed to light up on their own. I couldn't tell if the craft somehow left a luminescent substance on the tree that allowed it to glow continuously, or if it was lit from an unseen source. Either way, the details surrounding this encounter are quite interesting. So thank you very much, caller, for taking the time to share. Now, our next call of the evening comes to us from the state of Virginia, and the following was submitted by Mary Kate.
Hey there, my name is Mary Kate. I'm from Mechanicsville, Virginia. I just started listening to your show, and it's awesome. I'm a huge fan. I'm calling to tell you about my experience with what I believe to be a ghost in my house. To give you a quick history, my grandmother died there at home back in, 2005, 2006. And my experience happened, I have a few things that have happened, but I'll just give you one or two depending on time. The first thing, it was around 2008. I was playing in my garage all by myself, the door shut. I was playing Guitar Hero, and the house was completely empty. Everyone was at one of my brother's soccer games or something like that. I don't remember exactly why no one was home, but I was home by myself, and the doors were all shut, and it's a garage that we turned into a rec room, so there's no airflow in and out. It's pretty stale, so we usually have the door open, but I had it shut. And while I was playing there, we had a stand, I don't know what they're called, but the lamps that are on their own, like they're taller lamps, that was in the corner of the room, and I was just playing by myself, and then all of a sudden, the lamp just slammed down onto the floor and traveled like a foot or two away from where it was initially standing. And so it didn't just gently fall over, or I don't think there was anything that could have caused it, like any kind of mouse or rat or something running past. And I didn't have any pets in the house or anything like that at the time, so I don't know what else it could have been. So that was one real experience, and I ran out of the room and was totally freaked out and called my friend over and just didn't go back into the room until my parents had gotten home. So that was one experience. Then a second experience was I was upstairs in my parents' bathroom getting ready to go out, and I was fixing my hair, looking in the mirror. And so the door, it has a closet door that opens basically like an L. So you've got two doors that are pretty close together where their hinges are, and if you open both of them, they'll meet each other. But the bathroom door the closet door, was completely shut, and the bathroom door was just cracked open. And I was in there getting ready, and all of a sudden, the lights start flickering. That kind of, whatever, the power must be doing something weird. And then the bathroom closet door that was shut opens up. And so I thought nothing of it. Okay, fine, maybe pressure change in the house, something could have occurred there. But so that I discounted, and I ignored that until the other door moves. So I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. The lights flicker and the door is moving. So I shut both of the doors, and the closet door again opens. Then I close it back, and it opens again. I'm like, okay, maybe something's pushing it. And so I look around to see if there's any towels or something that are there, and nothing that I could find. So I shut it again and push my foot against it to make sure it's really shut. And it opens up again in one direction, and then it closes itself. So that really freaked me out, and that was enough for me with the lights flickering and the doors moving. I ran out of the room, and I yelled out to see if anybody was home, and my sister came to me and said, what's going on? And I told her that the doors were opening and shutting on their own after the lights had flickered. It's just too much of a coincidence to me. And so I don't know if maybe that was my grandmother trying to communicate or something else. All I know is that it really freaked me out, and so that's my story. Thanks so much. Love the show.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Now, if I didn't know any better, I would say there's a distinct possibility that this entity, spirit, or whatever it is, may be targeting Mary Kate. Now, she didn't mention any other occurrences in the house that were experienced by anyone other than her. Is that because she hasn't yet mentioned those occurrences, or is that because those occurrences didn't happen? And I suppose we will have to wait for Mary Kate's next submission to get to the bottom of what may be going on. Thank you again, Mary Kate, for taking the time to share your tale. Now, I don't consider it a good show unless I've included some sort of alien black cat sighting. So without further ado, the following comes to us from Kyle in the state of Texas.
Hey, Derek, Kyle from Texas. I'm calling to talk about a thing that happened to me whenever I was deer hunting probably 10 years ago. I was probably about 15 years old. We were hunting in East Texas close to the Louisiana line, and I was sitting in this deer stand, and I had what we call shooting lanes. I had 3 lanes, one in front of me, one to the left, and one to the right. And I looked down to the left lane, glance to the right, and I see what appeared to be a large black cat. I know everyone loves the black cat stories. I know what I saw. It was a big black cat. I saw about half the body, and it was going into the woods across the lane. His tail seemed to be 5 foot long, and it was probably 3 to 4 feet tall. That was on my first hunt. Second hunt, there was some behind me. There was like a marsh type deal, water standing about 6 inches deep, and I could hear something coming through the water. I knew it sounded like a deer, so I was getting ready. Then I heard a lot of splashing. I heard a deer like bleat, and then a lot of thrashing around in the water. Not sure what happened. I always assumed that black cat got a deer behind me. But yeah, I know you like the black cat stories, so there's a little one that I've experienced. Love the podcast. Keep up the good work, man. See you later.
Thank you, Kyle. Now, I certainly don't mean to take from Kyle's experience here, but I would like to at least mention the possibility that perhaps an American alligator took down that deer. Certain parts, especially the eastern and southeastern parts of Texas, certainly have their population of gators. Now that said, there is another culprit that is equally as awesome, but less mysterious than the alien black cats. That is the jaguar. Now, recent studies have proven that jaguars are crossing into the United States. A few trail camera pictures have been captured in the state of Arizona, and first-hand accounts have come out of places like Southern California, New Mexico, and Texas. Now, for the added bonus to this part of the theory, unlike mountain lions, jaguars have the ability to be melanistic, or all black. So perhaps an all-black jaguar made its way into the state of Texas and just happened to cross in front of Kyle. Then again, there could be something else out there. Now, I realize I have a lot of new listeners to the show, so I thought maybe this would be a pretty good opportunity to quickly rehash the story that not only got me fascinated with the alien black cat phenomenon, but single-handedly launched me into the cryptid world altogether. And I know many of you have heard this story, so I'll be as brief as possible. But when I was 10 years old, me and my brother and a friend of ours were exploring the woods behind my dad's house in southeast Ohio. This was a wide expanse of wooded land with a few pockets of pasture land here and there. I would easily say that the range of land we had to roam was several square miles, at the least. So this particular afternoon, we were sitting there having lunch on a giant rock when we heard crashing from the hillside adjacent to us. And we all looked up just in time to see a massive black cat bolt from one side of the hill to the other. The creature's body was no less than 3.5 to 4 feet long, not including the tail. And at the shoulder probably stood waist high to me at the time, and I was around 10 years old. We never did figure out what the creature was, but there are plenty of sightings from that area to support the alien black cat theory. So to this day, I'm still searching for the truth, and that search has expanded to things such as ghosts, UFOs, and other cryptids. So on that note, thank you again, Kyle, for taking the time to share that story. I realize it was probably a scary situation, but it would have been awesome if you were able to go to the location and see if you could find any tracks or footprints. Thank you again for sharing the call. And before we launch into our last few calls of the evening, I need to hit up a few of these announcements. This is already episode 14 of 20 in the season, so we're running out of time for these hometown legends. So if you have a story about your hometown or a town that you frequently visit, an urban legend, a terrifying historical event, now's the time to share. Simply call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or you can hit up the website at monstersamonguspodcast.com and click on the Report Your Sightings tab for more options. Now be sure to mention very early on in the call or the written submission that the submission is for the Hometown Legends episode. That will help me find it and ensure that it won't be skipped over. I recently uploaded a video update to the brick carving shenanigans that I've been doing here in the new studio. So if you're one of the lucky handful that donated money to receive a brick here in the studio, you may want to check out that video. And don't worry, your final videos, pictures, and all that are still coming once I have all of the carvings completely finished. Now recently I've had several people reach out to me about purchasing bricks now. Well, the situation is that I offered it up as an exclusive one-time offer. So I feel it's very unfair to those that participated early on and purchased the bricks during that time period. I also understand that a lot of people have come in to the show later on and perhaps would like a brick. So I'm going to lay this question out to those that donated. Would you mind if I opened it back up for a couple weeks? Or would you prefer that it stays the way it is? There are absolutely no wrong answers, and I'll pretty much do exactly as you guys request. So if you'd like to keep it closed, that's something we'll do. And if you'd like to open it back up and maybe improve a few other things here in the studio that definitely need upgrading. So those of you that have purchased bricks, send me a message. Let me know what you think about this situation. I leave it completely up to you guys. And for those that didn't get a chance to purchase a brick and would still like to support the show, there are 3 excellent ways you can do so. First, you can make a donation via the website. Click on the donate tab, and literally any amount that you offer up will go a long way to keep the show running for years to come. The second option is to buy a t-shirt, magnet, or perhaps a hat. Again, visit the website and click on the shop tab for all those options. And the third is Patreon. For a $4 monthly pledge, you get access to 2 additional episodes per month. A Paranormal News of the Month episode, where I discuss 5 or 6 news stories from the previous month that caught my eye and how they pertain to recent sightings and reports. And the second episode is a deep dive episode, where I take a past experience that's been shared on the show and actually sit down with the experiencer. So to sign up, visit patreon.com/Monsters Among Us podcast. And by the way, I'm wide open to other Patreon reward levels. So if anyone out there has any suggestions for different reward levels, please let me know. I'm happy to do whatever it is that makes you guys happy. And on that note, let's get back to the show. Our next submission of the evening seems to describe a haunted toy. The following comes to us from Brandon in the state of Nebraska.
Hey Derek, this is Brandon from Nebraska. I called in previously about the apparition of my cat here, and just listening to the podcast, almost caught up all the way through. I love it. It's fantastic. You know, it's something that I really enjoy, cryptids, cryptozoology, and wanted to find a podcast, and yours is the first one I found, and I'm not disappointed, that's for sure. I just want to kind of tell a quick story about when we moved in the house. This was about 3 years ago, beginning of the summertime. Moved into this house we're in now. It's about 110 years old. We haven't really had any spooky stuff happen or, ghostly things go on in the house. We hear things, but we got a bunch of cats, so you never know. It could just be something they did, or one of them, when they're all around, could be something that they knocked over and just is now finally making a noise, falling over or something like that. We've heard footsteps, blah, 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 the simple stuff like that. But there is one time where my daughter was upstairs in her room playing with her, she had a Cinderella Barbie doll, and she all of a sudden threw the Barbie doll down the stairs, the Cinderella doll, piece by piece, and we heard it coming down the stairs, and me and her mother kind of got up and looked to see what was happening, and we just see her lobbing, leg, and then another leg, and then the arm, and then an arm, and then the body and the head, one after another down the stairs. And we asked her why she did that, and she looked at us and said, "Its face changed. I don't want it anymore." And so my wife immediately gathered the pieces and threw them in the outside garbage out of the house. And we asked my daughter to explain kind of what was going on, and she refused to talk about it. She was terrified, wanted to sleep with us all night long, but it wasn't something that ever kind of came back. It's just a story that we had at that time, so who knows if she was just playing, but she seemed genuinely terrified. Obviously little kids like to sleep with their parents and everything in the bed, but she was probably about 3 at the time. So she could have just been using it as a ploy to get out of sleeping in her own bed for the night. But I kind of doubt that, just because of the way I saw her. She looked absolutely terrified that one of her favorite toys' face changed, that she went to the lengths to rip it limb from limb and throw it down the stairs. So just kind of wanted to share that with you, something kind of really creepy that happened in my family to you. So I appreciate everything you do, and the podcast is great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Brandon. Your story reminds me of something embarrassing that happened to me when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. You see, I had a He-Man backpack, and I loved He-Man at the time. It was a black backpack with a little bit of screen-printed cartoon action on the front pocket, if I remember correctly. And I wore this thing everywhere. Took it to school, took it into the woods. That was my backpack. Well, somehow I got it in my head that the backpack was bad luck. My grandparents suddenly moved to Florida. I believe one of our pets died suddenly. There were a couple other things that happened, in close relation to one another. Somehow in my tiny mind, I determined that the backpack was the cause of my troubles. So one evening, I got the bright idea to bury this backpack. To this day, it still sits in the ground somewhere on my dad's property. I couldn't even tell you exactly where I buried it. But surprisingly enough, the bad luck seemed to have ceased. Now I realize these two stories have little to do with one another, outside of the fact that they involve toys, but I couldn't help but look back and laugh. Thank you again, Brandon, for taking the time to share that creepy one. The theme to our next story is brand new to Monsters Among Us. I can't think of a single time we've covered anything even remotely close. So put your boots on for this one. The following comes to us from Donald in the state of South Carolina.
Hey, Derek. This is Donald from South Carolina calling. Just wanted to relay a story to you. This happened a long time ago. It was the 70s. I remember we were upstate New York visiting family up that way, and my grandfather used to have a bunch of apple farms. He had thousands of acres of apple farms. We had gone out there one time to do some target practice, and my dad and some of my other relatives had all brought their low caliber rifles to shoot, and all the kids were out there target practicing, and there was a little river, kind of more like a creek, you know, just to the side of where we were, and all of a sudden we kind of look over to the left and we see something that resembled a pterodactyl, but it was probably anywhere from 12 to 14 foot wingspan, no more than 30 foot away, and probably about 10, 12 of us, and everybody saw it and were in disbelief. And it kind of flew by and looked right at us and then swooped down into the little creek area, and which at that point it was out of sight. And a couple of people were actually going to shoot at it, but then one of the adults screamed, "Don't shoot it, don't shoot it." And it was the craziest thing in the world. Later on, when we got back to the house, because all the kids were kind of still freaking out about it, one of the adults was like, "Oh, no, that was a blue herring." We ended up looking into that, and it was definitely not a blue herring. It did not have any feathers at all. It was really freaky, and it was close enough for us to get a really good look at it. It did have a crest on its head and a long beak, kind of like a, you know, if you look at a pterodactylus and, you know, have a little bit more of a crest. Didn't have a noticeable tail, but you did see the two legs sticking in the back, the hind feet, if you will. Anyway, just figured I'd let you know that story, and love the podcast, and keep up the good work. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Donald. Now, many of you may be wondering, what did you just listen to? A pterodactyl in the 21st century. Now, we understand that it's pretty far-fetched to believe that a pterodactyl could be living here in the U.S., unidentified, undiscovered, so to speak. But what if I told you that that's not the first and only pterodactyl sighting to be reported in this country? In fact, there have been dozens of reports submitted over the years, in addition to several videos that have actually been posted. I'm going to link to a handful of these in the show notes for tonight's episode, so if you want to check out any of these pterodactyl stories or videos, I can save you some searching. Now, I also should point out that in Papua New Guinea, there's a creature known as the ropen, which essentially is a pterosaur or pterodactyl type creature. One of the odd descriptions that the people of Papua New Guinea ascribe to this creature is the fact that it seems to glow in the dark. Certain parts of it appear to be bioluminescent. Even when I read about that as a kid, there was something about the bioluminescent part that just made it real to me. Of all the things, why would they make that part up? Now, if you need additional examples as to why something like this could or possibly may still exist somehow, somewhere, there have been multiple dinosaur sightings in South America. And of course, there's Mokele Mbembe, the creature that stops the flow of rivers, deep in the Congo. A creature said to look exactly like a brontosaurus.
This huge creature is said to prowl the land and lurk beneath inland waters. Natives call it Mokele Mbembe, one that stops the flow of rivers.
A heavy armored sides, scales, a fringe of scales down the back.
Footprints of the order of 3 feet in circumference.
He always came out of the cave to find food.
The people call this animal Mokele Mbembe.
Eyewitnesses report seeing a creature with a long neck and a snake-like head. They say it has a body as big as an elephant with 4 legs, claw-like feet, and a long tail. Most of these accounts suggest it is a semi-aquatic animal that spends most of its time in the rivers that run through the jungle.
That clip comes courtesy of the series Monster Quest. Season 3, the episode is titled The Last Dinosaur. And of course, a link to that can be found in tonight's show notes. So whatever it is that Donald saw that day, it certainly has me intrigued. So thank you again, Donald, for taking the time to share that call. And now it is time for the final call of the evening. So without further ado and without further hesitation, the following Bigfoot call comes to us from the state of Vermont and was submitted by John.
Hey, Derek. Hey, Addie. Hey, Warren. My name is John, longtime listener. I discovered your podcast about a year ago. Just recently joined the Facebook page, and I believe I'm following you on Instagram as well. Always kind of been into the paranormal and the cryptozoology, any of that stuff, a lot of mythology and folklore too. I actually lived in the Capital District in New York State, down near Albany, but I grew up in the neighboring state of Vermont, more specifically southwestern Vermont. And the story I have for you, I know you're like me, you're kind of a Sasquatch fan. I actually grew up in an area where it was known to have a Bigfoot. I did grow up in the town of Bennington, Vermont. Bennington is known specifically for the Battle of Bennington and the helping to overthrow the British during the Revolutionary War. There's an area between Route 7 North and Route 9 West. I know it's in different books and whatnot as the Bennington Triangle. There was a number of disappearances there from 1945 to 1951 near the town of Glastonbury, which is a whole separate thing. But there's also a little-known story of the Bennington Monster, which the most well-known story of that is supposedly overturned a stagecoach that was going from the town of Glastonbury to the town of Somerset, which is actually closer to the Route 9 side. I grew up on a mountain that's called Bald Mountain, but known better to the locals as East Mountain because of the road that runs through it called East Road. I had learned of the Bennington Monster, and I always thought it was cool because I was always, out of the cryptozoology things out there, I've always been fascinated with the Sasquatch or Bigfoot or the big hairy ape guy. Anytime I see a show coming on that is talking about the Grassman or the Jersey Devil or anything like that, I got to sit down and watch it because that's the one thing that I really get excited about. Anyways, in the town I grew up in, there was the Bennington Triangle. In the middle of the Bennington Triangle, there was the Bennington Monster, which was supposedly a Bigfoot that inhabited a mountain range in Glastonbury Mountain and would float between Glastonbury and Somerset. Like I said, I was married at the time. I was living right on the Bald Mountain, which is in that same mountain range, right between Route 7 and Route 9. And one of my husbandly duties at the time was I would take the trash bins we had and bring them out by the road, and we had a local waste management company pick them up, and then I'd pull them back inside the house. One night I was bringing them out, and I remember hearing some of the neighbors around the area say that they used to hear there was a coyote pack, or coy dog as we call them, a coy dog pack that would kind of go crazy at certain times of night. It happened for a while, and then it kind of went away, and then it kind of started up again, and it sounded across the road from me was like this. It was an old cow pasture because I used to be babysat at my grandparents' house, and it was kind of a small working family farm. It's defunct obviously by now, but I would hear them kind of just go crazy, and I kind of asked my neighbors, and they weren't really familiar with what I was talking about. But this one night, I think it might have been October or something, I was bringing the trash cans out by the road, and I'd always sort of thought to myself that maybe the Bennington monster, if it did live, it had to. I lived literally less than 10 minutes from the entrance to the town of Glastonbury. It was a town back in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Had a hotel, casino, because it was just so far detached from civilization. And eventually people just picked up and moved away. I always sort of thought the Bennington monster might travel between there, just because I grew up a mile down the road from my grandparents. It was all state forest across the road, and there was wide open logging trails or hiking trails and logging roads. Just it was easy walking. My dad tried to get me to hunt as a kid, so I would hunt that mountain, and I just always thought it was pretty good. And this one particular night, and I still can't explain it, and I've never really told anybody the story, but when I brought him out, I heard like a knocking sound, like somebody had banged a stick against a tree, and I still remember looking into the woods, and there was just enough moonlight where I could see like a silhouette down on the other side of the field, and I did have a flashlight with me. I had a mag light. It was a road in the middle of nowhere, and I was just kind of sketchy about it, so I shined the flashlight down there, and I swear I saw something move after what I saw looked like a shadow at the other end of the trees, and I shined it, and I swore I saw movement, like a brown blur. The next day I went down and tried to see if I could find some signs or something of it, and could see some scrapings, and I saw some animal footprints. But I still go out in the woods now, but after my father passed away in 2011, I sort of gave up on trying to be the deer hunter, which that's a whole other story. I was never really comfortable with taking an animal's life, but I still consider myself to be an outdoorsman. I go out in the woods, and I leave only footprints, and more of a hiker at this point. I just always thought it was cool to grow up in an area with a Bigfoot story. Just thought I'd share it with you. Like I said, I've been listening for a long time, working up the courage. Absolutely love what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's awesome, the platform that you've given people to share their stuff where they're not judged or made to feel like they're crazy. It's really cool. Good job. Give up the good work. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you, John. Now, you may remember I discussed some of these disappearances a few episodes back when we discussed another call from the Vermont area. Now, this place, the Bennington Triangle, is infamous, to say the least, for its strange activity, disappearances, and sightings. Now, if that's something you'd like to learn more about, I'm going to suggest a short little documentary for you by a man named Matt Garland. You can actually find a link to this documentary in the show notes for tonight's episode. I highly recommend you sit down and take a look. As for your sighting, John, there have been other sightings of a creature like this in your area. There have been disappearances in your area. And although I've never been there, I've heard and read that the area could support a large bipedal creature like the Bennington monster. So I suppose anything is possible. Now, if the Vermont area, and specifically the Bennington Triangle area, is as active as many claim it to be, perhaps there's someone else out there with a monster sighting from that area. If that's the case, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, John, for taking the time to share this call, and especially thank you for the kind words. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Warren Pon Abbott, Addie Lloyd, and Tony Bell. Music for this episode was provided by Coag Music. Thank you all for listening, and until next week. I have some good news, and I have some bad news. The bad news is there is no post-credit story this evening. The good news is there's a bonus episode airing no later than Monday, so keep your eyes open for that one. Thanks for all the support, and have a great night.
Monsters Among Us listeners, this is Dennis Hayes, Derek's dad. Derek always has a story for everything he says. And to let everybody know, I know about 90% of everything he said. I've heard before. I've known about it. So he's not just making up stories. He's telling you what he's heard and done. And he's actually done all this stuff.
Thanks, Dad. A good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. And welcome back to this, your 12th installment of the 12th season. And I have a swell little show lined up for you guys this evening. We have monsters, ghosts, cults, alien abductions, Mexican witches, and a lot more, all waiting for us on the other side. So, let's not keep them waiting. To kick this evening off, we make our way to the bottom of the world. At least, from my perspective. Please join me in welcoming Kim from Australia to the program.
Hi Derek, hi everyone. My name's Kim and I'm from Cairns, Australia. And this is my friend's story about her YOWIE encounter. So last year in March, she bought a motorhome and she went to travel around Australia. But then COVID hit, so she set up camp at my dad's house, which is south of Cairns. He lives at the base of a mountain and he's on about 2 acres. So I was working from home at the time. So one morning she came in pretty shaken up and she told me that the most frightening thing happened to her last night. She reckons that she woke up sometime in the early morning and she heard footsteps approaching her van and like twigs breaking, and she was trying to listen. She was listening real close and she's trying to think if it was a person. And she was leaning more towards like a wild pig or something. And we don't have bears or anything here, so the most ferocious you're going to get is a cassowary or a wild pig. It got closer and her windows were open, so she could hear it it was quite close. She thought next it was my dad, but there's no way that he would be out there at her camper van at night. That's just real sus. So she heard heavy breathing get closer, and then she heard like low grunting, and she was terrified. And it hung around for a bit, and she just laid there frozen. She wasn't game to look up and see what it was. Eventually it just trailed off into the bushes. She heard it walk away, and obviously she asked my dad if he was outside at night, and obviously like he wasn't. There's no reason for him to. And yeah, I